Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to you, Wendy, and to Fiona for making tonight possible. I think it's a really important forum. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I acknowledge my esteemed colleagues to my left, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and their care of it for thousands of years, to appreciate its beauty, to be wise stewards of its resources, and to honour the connection the traditional custodians have with this land. Associated Christian Schools is a faith-based charity established to advance education from a Christian worldview for the public benefit. In doing so, ACS provides collegial support to member schools and facilitates personal and professional development for member school leaders to encourage and equip them in their mission to promote education with Christian values. We represent 38 member schools throughout Queensland with approximately 23,000 enrolled students across these member schools. We welcome the government's consultation on the health legislation amendment. Our concern is in respect of Part 5 of the bill and specifically as it pertains to conversion therapies. We provided 2 submissions to this in relation to this bill, a standalone submission and a joint submission together with Christian Schools Australia, Adventist Schools Australia and the Australian Association of Christian Schools. In combination, our 4 organisations encompass over 60 schools throughout Queensland, which operate as independent, locally governed religious organisations. Some are closely aligned with one or more Christian churches in their communities, while others have their heritage in a group of parents coming together to start a school. Adventist Schools Australia operate on a systemic basis. Many of the member schools of these organisations employ school counsellors and pastoral care counsellors, and our concerns regarding this bill are in respect of the work of these counsellors and the work they perform, who ACS considers would probably come within the statutory definition of health service providers. Whether there is a need for a new legislation to address the abhorrent practices of the mid-20th century practices is questionable, as there is no evidence that they remain in use within Australia. Even if evidence emerges to suggest that such practices are ongoing, existing regulation of medical and health services would seem to provide an appropriate mechanism to deal with these practices if they are occurring and not subject to existing criminal law. Health practitioners must be able to advance the best interests of their patients in any given situation and with all the information necessary to make proper decisions. Therefore, it is important that any legislation safeguards also take into account the religious doctrines and beliefs of health service providers and their employing institutions, and the right of religious institutions to be able to communicate these doctrines and beliefs. The bill should not prevent counsellors, particularly when they are engaged within a religious institution, such as our schools, from communicating the institution's religious doctrines and beliefs, whether they pertain to sexuality, gender identity, or indeed any other issue. Such conduct should not result in potentially criminal sanctions against the health service provider, particularly where there are already other statutory protections to protect against vilification and similar conduct. ACS hopes that this is not the intent of the bill. However, the broad definition of conversion therapy does lead to this apprehension. In this regard, we submit that the bill should include a specific exemption for health service providers where they are employed or engaged by a religious institution, authorising the provision of health services that accords with the doctrines and beliefs of that institution. Further, we submit that the bill should make it clear that conversion therapy does not extend to the communication of religious doctrine and belief, again in circumstances where the health service provider is employed or engaged within a religious institution such as our schools. Finally, while we agree that young people should have the benefit of certain legislative protections, it is less clear why such prohibitions should apply in respect of adults who, by way of their informed consent, freely participate in counselling regarding their sexuality and gender identity. Again, health service providers should not face criminal sanctions when communicating their religious doctrines and beliefs and providing treatment consistent with these religious doctrines and beliefs, particularly where an adult freely engages with the health service provider for the purpose of obtaining counselling consistent with their beliefs and doctrines. All education jurisdictions across Australia are signatories to the Alice Springs and Partua Declaration, which asserts in its preamble, education plays a vital role in promoting the intellectual, physical, social, emotional, moral, spiritual and aesthetic development and well-being of young Australians, and in ensuring the nation's ongoing economic prosperity and social cohesion. We strongly agree that the education of the whole child is not complete unless it includes spiritual, moral, emotional and aesthetic development along the more commonly stated domains of the intellectual, physical and social. This includes areas of sexuality and identity. Students must be able to seek advice from school staff about their sexuality or gender identity, and school staff must be able to respond to those questions. In summary, the Queensland Government must firstly define what is being considered under the rubric of conversion therapy and then undertake a comprehensive evidence-based review of the full implications of any such almost unprecedented bill. A short inquiry by a parliamentary committee over the Christmas-New Year period is simply not enough. An extensive public inquiry will help to inform the public consultation process and ensure a more robust evidence-based for any legislation. That given how broad health service and health service provider is defined, essentially any individual or entity that provides a service for maintaining, improving, restoring or managing people's health and well-being. The proposed bill is so broad that it infringes religious freedom to provide counselling or pastoral services that accord with Christian beliefs. That there should be an appropriate exemption to protect health service providers where the conversion therapy is provided in accordance with doctrines and beliefs of the religion concerned and with the fully informed consent of the individual. That conversion therapy should at least not include the communication of a health service provider's doctrines and beliefs pertaining to sexual orientation and gender identity. On behalf of the parents who choose a faith-based education and the church and faith communities that deliver it, schools represented in our submissions are overt and particular about their beliefs and values that underpin curriculum, culture and practice. The clearest expression of the protections afforded religious freedom is undoubtedly in Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. A number of other intentional instruments explicitly include recognition of the right to establish faith-based schools. This builds on the rights of parents recognised in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. Similar rights are recognised in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Australia is also a signatory. Finally, the Queensland Government must guarantee that Christian schools can continue to teach according to their foundational values, doctrines and beliefs. Thank you.